Hello and welcome to Rob from the Internet Talks About Beer, a show where we discuss different styles of beer, beer history, beer flavor profiles. We give a shout out or two to a brewer we think does beer exceptionally well, and we talk about whatever else happens to come to mind. I'm Rob from the Internet. Let's talk about beer. All right, so joining me today is Mark McDermott.
Hi.
So if you would, tell me a little bit about yourself, Mark, and how you got interested and into the world of craft beer.
Well, I live in Downers Grove, which is a suburb of Chicago. Moved to the area 30 years ago. And surprisingly, a long time ago, I was in Mensa, and at one of their annual regional gatherings, they had people from the Chicago Beer Society come over and bring their own beer and give us the revelation that, yes, you can make your own beer. Then a couple years after that was when Goose Island opened up in the former Turtle Wax factory on Clybourne Avenue. And so here was a place that made their own beer. So you just kind of get into it from there. For a while, I have been home brewing, and I started blogging about the beer scene in Chicago. I have a site called beeronaut.com, and I've just kind of watched the whole local beer scene grow from just one or two breweries, one in Chicago, a couple in the suburbs, to now over 200 in our metropolitan area. So it's been kind of fun to sit and watch the growth of craft beer practically almost very figuratively explode in this area. I've been trying to work on a book about the whole idea of craft beer as a fan culture, where we look at beer fans as if they were like Star Trek fans or comic book geeks and so forth. That's kind of falling by the wayside as I keep trying to work from home, but who knows, it may come back at some point.
Right. Well, and really, you're not wrong. I mean, craft beer fans are just as avid and rabid about craft beer as, say, people who are into Star Trek or Star Wars or any of the comic book scenes or anything like that. I mean, the fan base is huge. The fan base is very passionate. So.
Mm-hmm. And I've been examining some of the biographies of some of the heroes of craft beer, like Sam Calagione, Greg Hall Jr. at Goose Island, and Sierra Nevada. And they all kind of have a similar story. They discover good beer while they're overseas, or some of them in the military, and just kind of go on the journey to starting their own brewery. Then they find their whales, the beer that people are going to be lining up for. So it just they just all kind of fall into a similar narrative that I'm hoping to tie together.
Nice. All right. Well, let's jump right into what we're drinking today. Today we're going to be talking about Pilsners. I will be having Skeleton Park Bohemian Pilsner. It's from their Heritage Series. So their Heritage Series are beers that all the recipes are at least 100 years old, and they try and stick to as close to maintaining the original recipe as possible.
All right, and I have with me the Pilsner from Goldfinger Brewing Company. They just had their first anniversary this past weekend, and the fun part about it for me is that they were about 1,000 feet from my back door. This is started by a family that traced their roots back to Poland. The Goldfingers of Poland had their own brewery and manufactured their own brewing equipment. And if you go to their brewery now, which we talked about Goose Island being in a former Turtle Wax factory, they are now the Goldfinger is now located in a former Permaseal office. There's a lot of fun reuse of buildings in the industry as well. A lot of old churches get repurposed and so on and so forth. So anyway, they have 6 poles, 6 drafts, all with the side pole faucet-like taps, and they only do lager beers. They have their original lager, which is closer to your regular beer, and then Pilsners, which I found out this is actually a German Pilsner, and then they will occasionally have on a Bohemian Czech type Pilsner, and for their anniversary they had a Polish Pilsner, which was made with Polish hops. I thought it gave it a little drier, slightly pepperier taste, and a Grodziski, the Polish smoked wheat beer, and they also have a Mexican lager, which they supply to one of the local Mexican restaurants, which turns out to be not half bad as the skunky Corona you used to get out of a bottle.
Yeah. A good Mexican lager is a fantastic beer. I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. So, in terms of history, Pilsner, as I know, and you might know more than me, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Pilsners originated in the Bohemian city of Pilsen, which is in what is now the western part of modern Czech Republic, and it was first mass produced in 1842 by a Bavarian brewer named Joseph Groll. It was the world's first pale lager. The original Pilsner Urquell is still produced in Pilsen today. And it's something I've discovered when I was doing a little bit of research, is that until 1993, Pilsner Urquell Brewery fermented its beer in open barrels. So it wasn't until the 90s that they switched over to stainless steel vessels, which I thought was interesting. So it makes me kind of wish I could travel back in time and grab some beer from 93 and then go to 94 and see if the flavor profile changed at all from not being fermented open air as opposed to in stainless steel. So,
well, yeah, among the other bits of information I learned, that they basically the whole trend toward lighter beer at that era started because they were going from stone, your earthenware or ceramic German beer mugs, to clear glassware, which was now being manufactured. And people started to look at their beer and they didn't like what they saw. They wanted something clear. And so that's when they started moving toward the lighter lagers. And the story goes that apparently a Czech monk in Bavaria had smuggled out samples of lager yeast in 1840, and that gave them something to work from. And the other thing we hear about lager yeast now is they've tried to track where it came from, and now they think its original source was in Patagonia in South America, and the explorers at that time in the 16th, 17th century just shipped stuff back home in crates made from wood there, and the lager yeast kind of got a ride from it, and that's how it got established in Europe.
Yep. Yeah. Actually, I did a show in my previous sessions on lagers with a brewer from in Washington State. And we got onto that subject because we were talking about the lager yeast versus ale yeast, and it's really interesting that they just recently discovered the origins of it, relatively compared for as long as we've been doing lagers and things like that.
But but when they started doing the lagers and pilsners, that's when they first really realized what yeast was doing for beer. So anyway. I think I lost my train of thought, but
it happens. I mean, it's a show about beer.
So the differences they say between Czech and German pilsners is that the Czech area had much softer water, while the Germans adapted to a harder water profile.
Yep.
So we're going to have slightly different tastes if these are made according to style. And I know the closest I've really gotten to the actual source was a Budvar or Czechvar, as they call it, at the airport in St. Petersburg, Russia. And that was incredibly flowery, and it kind of made me realize, oh, that's what a Pilsner can be. So that was fun to discover, but the German one I have here is not going to quite be up to that profile. And that was when all the beer still came in bottles that kind of got skunked on the way over. So imports were still not as good as they are these days.
Right. So so this one, this that I have has a beautiful golden color to it. and it's got a very light aroma, and it is slightly floral. Um, it's I guess it's kind of floral and kind of bready. So you get kind of a kind of that, the smell of fresh bread with it. So
Okay, I just started mine pouring. I use the traditional Stengi glass.
very nice. I'm
So,
just using a
oh
cheap
yeah.
old pint glass.
But yes, that's when people wanted to see things through their beer instead of because yeah, once they and the Mr. Grohl, what's his name again?
Joseph.
Joseph, when he created the style, insisted on using very lightly kilned malts instead of roasted or smoked malts. So that helped create the lighter flavor. And when the Americans like Budweiser, like Anheuser-Busch and Miller tried to recreate it, they did not have the same access to two-row malts. So that's when they had to start use adjuncts to keep it from just to keep it light. So
Right. Yeah. So this the initial flavor, is really light. It's sweet.
mhm.
Um, it's got a slightly like toasted biscuit flavor to it, and it's got the mouthfeel is kind of a bready. It's got that medium body, kind of a bready body to it. It's really really fantastic.
Yeah, the smell here is a very light. I like to call the German hops kind of peppery, but the malts in the nose really don't stand up against the hops too much. So I think they still make their beers a little more hop forward, perhaps than the very traditional style.
Yeah. Well,
But
I know this beer uses Saaz as the hops, so I'm not sure what yours uses, but this one uses Saaz, which is a very mild hop.
yeah, I think this will probably be looked at using Hallertauer and Mittelfrüh, the traditional German styles.
Yep.
And mine is much lighter and clearer than what I saw from you on the screen.
Yours is much lighter colored than mine. Mine is very golden colored. So it's a darker. It's almost the color of honey. I mean, it's
Hmm. And this is what we all are familiar with from. This is what we think beer looks like from when our fathers first let us have a sip.
correct. In the terms of one of my friends who's not a beer connoisseur of any sort, it's a beer flavored beer, and that's what
Hmm.
he's always looking for. And sometimes that's what you want. You just want a
Right.
plain old ordinary. Give me a beer that tastes like beer, and everyone thinks this tastes like beer because this is what everybody tries when they're first starting out.
But I think, yeah, people who aren't really starting out, who are just starting out with beer, or maybe they've just used the mega brews, the American light lagers, they will find this is a little more spicy and hoppy than they're used to, even though it's not what beer geeks would consider a hoppy beer, not a pale lager or anything like that.
Right, right, and it's also going to have a deeper uh, flavor profile than your Miller or your Bud or your Coors Lights or any of those that typically everyone drinks, because even though it's in the same vein, this has a lot more flavor to it than those, because it just from the way that it's made and the malts that they use.
But I find, yes, this does have a pretty nice dry finish, which I think is a characteristic of the German style Pilsner that I think is carried over to the American light lagers. So the malt doesn't really stand out as much. It's just kind of light and bready, or even like a soda cracker, perhaps.
Yeah, and this one, the finish is not as dry, so it has a little bit of a lingering aftertaste to it, where you still get a little bit of that kind of yeasty breadiness to it. So
Hmm.
um, again, it's a difference between the different types of pilsner, and it's amazing, and I've said this many times, how much flavor depth you can get from four basic ingredients.
Hmm.
You know,
And I think a lot of beer geeks will get surprised, I guess, when they go explore the heavily hopped IPAs and the very pastry stouts, and then they come back to the original styles that they may have just try to get away from, and then they find out, oh yeah, there is a difference between pilsners and lagers and so forth.
Yes, yes, yeah, very, very much so. Um, Now, in terms of in terms of blogging for beer, how long have you actually been putting out your blog?
I have been doing this for at least 10 years. I started out with another blogging platform that went under. The platform I am on now, chicagonow.com, is actually owned by the Chicago Tribune Company, which, they just got sold to one of those vulture capital firms that immediately offered a buyout to every columnist with a name on it, and but we're suspecting they're going to keep us going because they're getting free content from us.
Gotcha, gotcha.
But if I can get my WordPress prowess going a little better, I might try to switch to being independent. So someone who goes to my blog doesn't just get hit up with ads all up and down the wazoo. But the main portion of it that I try to keep it going at least twice a week with a calendar of upcoming events in Chicago that are beer related, new tappings, new breweries that are still opening. There's still a couple opening, at least two this past month, but then there's a couple that have closed down. So I think it's been a net gain in this area. There have been more openings than closings, and sometimes the smaller places will just slip away and you don't find out about it until you read that the owner is doing something new or something like that.
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, there are a fair amount of small breweries, and they come and go. And this past year and a half, 2 years has been rough for a lot of them. I know here in Canada, it was make or break for several small breweries up here. But luckily for us in Ontario, the government allowed them to start shipping their beer via postal mail all over the place, all over the province. So we were able to get beers from places that we would normally have to drive 8-9 hours to get to. It gets delivered to us. So it really helped bolster a lot of the smaller ones. But we still had a few that went under. But again, there's still a few that also opened during all this in the last couple of years. And that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, what happened here is that you could still ship beer by UPS or FedEx, not the Postal Service, but the state and city kind of gave their tacit approval to brewers being able to technically self-distribute their beers by either just doing deliveries themselves or signing up with food delivery services. And a lot of them were able to open outdoor seating, which helped a lot. I know some just haven't been in a location where they could do that sort of thing, but that has been what's really kept everybody together. I know a couple places, and this just happened this past week, in fact, is a very famous beer bar called Delilah's just found another one of their vaccinated servers tested positive for exposure. So they have done the due diligence. They're shutting down, scouring, and sanitizing, and just waiting until everyone comes back with a negative COVID test. So that is still going on. And we just had Lollapalooza in Chicago this past weekend. So
Right.
I did not go, fortunately. So yeah, I'm too old. I don't know half the names there anyway. But so yeah, that's pretty much a super spreader event that we probably should not have had. But there's a lot of stuff we probably should not be doing that is going on anyway.
Right, right. I actually saw some pictures from Lollapalooza online today, and it was, I mean, the sheer number of bodies packed in next to each other, and no thanks. I mean, I'm fully vaccinated, and I'm not concerned about getting it in just normal interactions, but I'm not going to press my luck by being someplace with like 50,000 other people butthole to belly button, you know?
Well, yeah, the past weekend I went to visit my parents in Iowa for the first time in a year and a half, and saw one of our friends who has a cabin up on the lakes right near the border of Minnesota, which is near the Arnold's Park amusement park. And yeah, that was we were the only people there masked pretty much. So we're my family and I are doing what we can to stay safe, and just we're all vaxxed. I was actually double vaxxed with the Johnson and Johnson vaccine because I was in a study to see if two shots will work any better than the one that they're recommending now. So,
Gotcha.
so I
Gotcha.
feel it's my superpower right now.
Double Johnson Johnson superpower. All right. All right. So, getting back to Pilsners,
Beer? Yeah.
getting back to beer. Yeah. So, if you had to choose, say, one brewery that you think does Pilsners really well, and it could be a micro brewery local to you, it could be a mass producer, it doesn't matter. Just one brewery that you think does it really well. Who would you choose?
Well, obviously, I like the folks who are right near me, and they have proven to be very popular. So it's not just me because I can walk down there, but there are quite a few other lager only breweries. There's Metropolitan in the city of Chicago
Yep.
that does those, um, and now I'm blanking out on the others, but pretty much everybody has been doing at least a lager and trying their hand at a pilsner. I know the Victory Prima Pils from Pennsylvania is still very highly thought of, and I tend to just go out. I mean, when I go to other breweries, of course, I try to find the biggest beer that they have to taste. So if they've got a barrel, they've got a barrel aged bourbon stout on hand, that's really what I'm going to go for, I guess.
Same.
The lightest beer. So I have not tried as many of the light beers as I could have from
Gotcha.
this area.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you like what you like. I'm the same way. Given the choice, I'm going to gravitate towards a barrel aged stout or a nice barrel aged barley wine is another one of my favorites. Things like that. I tend to go for the heavy hitting beers. I like to be able to have one and be done, as opposed to drinking 6, 7, 8 beers. So I guess I like to get more bang for my buck, so to speak.
Well, yes, and the story I like to tell is that w- sometime after I moved to Chicago, that was when Goose Island opened up, so I kind of hung out there. And one time I was sitting at their brew pub bar, and the server said, "Well, here, I'm going to let you try this. This is our 1000th batch. We had this crazy idea of taking one of our heavy stouts and putting it in a bourbon barrel." So I believe I had the first batch of Bourbon County Stout. And no, I can't remember the year either. They really are foggy on whether that came out in 1993 or 1995 or whatever.
If I remember correctly, I believe it came out in '93. Um, I've been drinking them for as long as they've been out. So, but yeah, they even they're a little murky. They don't remember the exact year, but I tend to believe that it was '93. And if I remember correctly, the very first one was done in Jim Beam barrels.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So someone goes, "Hey, we've got these Jim Beam barrels. You want them for anything?" And someone went, I wonder what we could do with that."
Yes, when I did home brewing, I was a member of the Brewers of South Suburbia, and they were the one. They claimed they were experimenting with barrel aging beers, and that's where Goose Island got the idea. But as we've said, there's a lot of really murky memories involved when you try to remember just when you made or even when you had a beer.
Well, that's because you're drinking beer typically when you're trying to
Exactly.
remember that stuff. All right. Well, if I was gonna give a shout out, I would actually give it to the beer I chose today. I chose this beer because it is a fantastic pilsner. So this is Skeleton Park. They're based out of Kingston, Ontario, which is about 3 hours north of me. And they've got a whole heritage series. Like I said, they've got a traditional English ale that they say the recipe is 150 years old. They've got a traditional amber ale, and then they've got this one. And there's one other in the heritage series, I believe, that I haven't tried yet. But all of them are fantastic because, like I said, they're all old world recipes, and they try and keep as much as possible to the recipes. And then the other thing that they do is they try and source as much of their grain locally as they can. So, because Ontario, much like the Midwest, is a big farm province. So there's a lot of farming going on here. There's a lot of corn, soybeans, things like that. So there's a lot of wheat and rye, especially rye. So, but yeah, so they try and source as much stuff as they can, and their product is fantastic. You can't go wrong with a good beer.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's not as much brewing grain being grown in this particular part of Illinois, but we have had a couple of hop farms that have been established just in the suburban area. And one of the major new yeast labs, Omega Yeast, has been established in this area. But so for my choice, and there are just so many brewers out there in places that are just so odd. I also wanted to call out Weiner Brewing, which was established in an old building in the Stockyards area that used to be a meat packing plant. And I think they were trying to get some of the wild beer going with whatever was found in the walls, but and that the rest of the building is like a vertical farm. They're growing tilapia fish and feeding plants out of the waste that the fish are making. But anyway, my shout out is to Goldfinger Brewing, and not just because they're down the street from me. They are not giving me any free beer to talk about this, but they really are sticking to traditional lager styles, and then they've gone and done a lot of collaborations with some of the local brewers to come up with maybe the occasional India pale lager and so forth. And I also have to give a shout out to a brewery in the town next to me called Skeleton Key in Woodridge, Illinois, because they were hit by a tornado just a couple of weeks ago. And it was like, their tap room was totally wrecked. They think they're salvaging the brewing equipment, but all the brewers and beer distributors in the area just showed up at their building and trucked all the beer that was packaged and ready to go, and were selling it out of another brewer. There's like a brewer in every town in this area, so I can't call them all out. But Downers Grove, where I'm from, has this one. They have a place downtown called Emmett's Brewing, and then another one off called Alter Brewing. There's actually a brewer at every stop on the commuter rail here.
Nice.
So they have been getting a lot of fundraisers, and Goldfinger picked up one of their beers to tap, a nice Schwartz beer. So there's a lot of cooperation in the beer community in this area, as I'm sure there is in your part of town too.
Yep. Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing about craft beer. They're not so much adversaries as they are comrades. I mean, yeah, they're all trying to sell their wares, and they're all trying to make their money. But if it comes down to it, if someone needs help, they're all willing to help each other. Mm-hmm. And that, I mean, that spirit of community is absolutely fantastic. And you find that throughout. I found that every place I've ever gone. When I lived in the States, it was that way. Up here, it's that way. And I imagine if you go anywhere where there's craft brewers, there's going to be the same type of thing. There's going to be a community feeling to it. So,
yeah, and I think even Goose Island is now owned by Anheuser-Busch, but they still try to keep a local focus going. And then the big brewers are always the ones who are, they're the ones who are going to try to find ways to brew to use less energy or using less water. And hopefully some of that technique filters down to the smaller users. But then again, some of them are still going to try to drive you off the shelf. So.
Right. That is true. Well, that we've come to the end of another episode of the show. So I would just like to thank Mark for being on, and I'd like to thank everybody who's going to watch this when it gets released. If you've enjoyed the program, please subscribe. If you want to be notified when new episodes come out, click the bell. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions for beer style you'd like to see discussed, please leave comments down below. Until next time, I'm Rob from the internet. Cheers.
And Mark, hello, cheers.